Hi, Sasha Ederer here. I want to make a follow-up video to my last and provide further indices and circumstantial evidence regarding my case, and also talk about some things which I find very worrisome. Throughout the last couple of weeks, there's been a hoax going on the internet. Dozens of YouTube channels have reported on this, some of them have tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of views, about the DoD having conducted a raid here in Frankfurt on servers by the CIA, which allegedly contain information on the manipulation of the presidential election votes, and having killed CIA Director Gina Haspel in the process. And this is an extremely typical example for a CIA discrediting tactic and tactic of confusing and manipulating public opinion. So how do these things work? They take several keywords of the topic which they want to discredit, which is DoD, Frankfurt, CIA, Gina Haspel, which is related to the torture. They mix in a bunch of information which is true, for example, servers being situated here in Frankfurt, them containing information about the election fraud, maybe even the election fraud itself, which may be true and which may be another topic which they want to discredit, or which may serve as a facade for the real topic which they want to discredit, which is this. Construct a whole story around it which is completely false and absurd, and then let it out in the public. And what it does, it does not only just discredit, it does not only just take attention away from the topic which they want to discredit, but also if you're a reporter, for example, it conditions you, or it may condition you into finding a story such as mine absurd, simply because you heard a similar, let's say, story a few weeks prior. It is also something which they very like to do, to mix true with false information, because it becomes very difficult to parcel out the truth from the falsehood. And then a person who may research on any subject like that may give up on it altogether, simply because it is so difficult and confusing. It is a tactic which has been extensively outlined by Fiona Barnett in her manuscript Eyes Wide Open, for example. Who is Fiona Barnett? Fiona Barnett is a victim of CIA's MK Ultra experiments, which they have conducted in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and early 70s. What is widely known about MK Ultra is that they have drugged and tortured innocent, unknowing, and unwilling civilians situated in Canadian hospitals, for example, for their mind control experiments. They have paid relatives of those test subjects compensation in court and so on. But what is a bit lesser known, and it also serves as a facade, which is also something which they like to do a lot, is that it serves as a facade for the even worse MK Ultra sub-projects and experiments, where they, for example, raped and tortured little girls to the extent that they developed DID, dissociative identity disorder, which they could then use as a memory erasure and mind control tool, and also engaged in SRA, satanic ritual abuses, which does sound extreme. And you may wonder, is that true? And the answer to that is most definitely yes. So there are several distinct sources on the internet which all report the same thing. For example, this artist right here, which may be one of my most favorite artists, she's an astounding artist. When I first read about Fiona Barnett, it has reminded me of this woman who I came across a few years ago when I was very interested in dissociative identity disorder. She suffers from 20 different personalities. And so when I read Fiona Barnett, it has reminded me of her, because I already thought back then, what does a person have to endure to develop 20 different personalities? And I thought maybe it has something to do with her, and turns out it does. If you look at the art by Kim Noble, by one of her alters, Rhea Pratt, it exactly matches the the
It says
descriptions by Fiona Barnett, the same engagement, the same imprisonment methods, the electroshockers, the dissociation, the rape, the engagement methods. Everything matches the descriptions by Fiona Barnett exactly. There are also other paintings by her, other authors, which also make art which are a bit more telling, right? But not only that, there are other documentaries and other distinct sources which all talk about the same thing: child rape, child abuse, child torture, satanic ritual abuses. This gentleman right here also has conducted a lot of research on the topic. Was very credible, and when I watched this video, and another good example of CIA discrediting tactics is actually this individual here, Brian Tu. Now, only in the recent days, throughout the last week or so, suddenly he's deleted almost all of his videos. He says in one video here that this YouTube channel has been permanently deleted, but it's complete bogus. He's had, only a few days ago, he's had videos uploaded, only videos uploaded which were uploaded 3 years ago, and none of these videos, and now suddenly it's these videos. There's not even 10% of his videos left anymore. He's had videos uploaded from the last 6 or 7 years, and now suddenly within the last week he or they have suddenly deleted all of his videos. Well, to me it's obvious that they did so in order to delete indices and evidence for what I'm about to tell you. Brian Tu is someone who I first came across round about, I think, 8 months ago, when I still worked as a receptionist at Fragomen here in Frankfurt. And I just typed in Brian Tu on YouTube and I just typed in CIA on YouTube and filtered it by upload date, and I came across his videos, which I didn't pay much attention to because they were he just seemed like the usual conspiracy theorist, right, with all the video titles written in caps and so on and so forth. But a few weeks later, he actually called me. He suddenly called me while I was working as a receptionist at Fragomen, and there are still colleagues there who can confirm this to you, asking for an attorney because he was at Frankfurt Airport and they were threatening him with they allegedly wanted to send him back to the USA, where he would allegedly get killed. And I knew back then that was a test by the CIA, the DOD, whoever are behind this, to check if I were still loyal to them, let's say, or if I would help out that individual, even though they've already extensively brainwashed and psychologically tortured me before. The psychological torture is more not waterboarding and so on and so forth, but sleep deprivations and the all day long overloading and the double binds and so on. Now, afterwards, I ended up helping him, and afterwards I became very interested in his videos because he talked about things which I could confirm from my experience to be true. And he also has written them on in his video descriptions, things which I knew to be true. And he seemed like a credible source insofar that he constructed this whole story of being an ex-DOD contractor and so on, and having but the problem was that, so he seemed like someone who was just not able to present himself in a credible manner. But there was also some things which was just too absurd to be believable. So it all ultimately came to me writing the following comment on one of his videos, which came to be the first major leak in this case. Hi Brian, I'm also a target. I don't consider myself that way anymore. I'm also a target and can confirm that much of what you say is true. My organs and extremities are also attacked by directed energy attacks. They have also attacked me with the same kind of chest entrainment that you're talking about in this video. I can also confirm more facts. However, part of me is suspicious whether you're one of their agents. From where do you have the info that Satan, silent assassination through amplified neurons, is the acronym for their weapon system? It sounds too cheesy to be believable, reminding me of the discrediting tactics the CIA used, which are outlined in MK Ultra victim Fiona Barnett's Eyes Wide Open, for example. Don't die on me. It turned out that he actually is a undercover IC officer. His videos after this comment, the next day he uploaded a video with a dodgy thumbnail, and his videos after this comment became more and more way too obviously not credible. And my guess is that because he had been saying things such as COVID-19 was an operation by the CIA in order to spread the nanotechnology necessary for the brain to computer interfaces to work, that he had to make it more obvious to the international ICs that he is actually an undercover officer and that these things are not necessarily true. Only on the 24th of December, he had uploaded a video with a thumbnail where he was in Stockholm, Sweden, with the thumbnail Stockholm Syndrome. So it's just apparent by now that he's that he's actually an undercover officer. Another reason why is because he's been calling the abuse he's been suffering from, allegedly, satanic ritual abuse. So not only does he serve to discredit the issue of targeted individuals, which is another extremely obvious, which is another issue, another topic where it's just extremely obvious what they're doing there, but also he discredits. Now, if you ask me what is the most evil thing that a person or an institution can do, then it is probably to rape and torture the most innocent beings there are, for example, little girls, to the extent that they develop dissociative identity disorder and do that en masse. And here you go, the CIA did it. But not only did they do it, because you can't, for example, make the German government today responsible for the crimes the Nazis have committed in the past. So you can't make the current CIA responsible for the crimes the CIA has committed in the past. But what you can make them responsible for is to actively deploy someone like Brian Tew in the field, who does not only serve to discredit the topic of targeted individuals and intimidate people such as me, but also to discredit the crimes they have committed in the past by making references to Satan and calling it all satanic ritual abuses and stuff. One day after I have made that comment, I have suddenly... So a few things happened afterwards. Not only did his videos become much and much more not credible, the website by Fiona Barnett also suddenly became censored, like you see here. There used to be, I'm gonna get into this in a second. The day after, and this is also something which has been extensively reported, I'm not sure if extensively, but it's also something which has been reported on by Fiona Barnett, and it is one of the ways through which they communicate, is this. The day after, someone has commented this as a reply on one of his comments on another video. That's a very big problem in my humble opinion. I'm afraid this will incite a counter-reaction that won't be gentle. So this is a torture threat. Though it may not be obvious to you. This is... So how do these things work? They even say it themselves. Those most superficial, those kind of coded messages which work on the most superficial level are messages where through rhetorical devices such as metaphors or paraphrasing or proverbs and so on and so forth, they convey several messages if you put them in different contexts. So that's a very big problem in my humble opinion. That was in reference to the comment which I made. I'm afraid this will incite a counter-reaction was a reference to one of Jordan's most one of the things which Jordan mentions a lot, which is that the main rule for any disciplinary action is to conduct it with minimum necessary force, because any excessive force will incite a counter-reaction. So this was supposed to discourage me from doing such things further. That won't be gentle. This is self-explanatory. If you look at his account, he has pictures of snakes eating bunnies. And you don't have to be too knowledgeable in mythology to understand what message that's supposed to transmit, which is also something which they like to do a lot. So make a lot of references to mythology and symbolism and so on and so forth, because they're all methods through which you can communicate with plausible deniability. Because I could never get that guy in court for saying something like, this will incite a counter-reaction which won't be gentle, right? And also what happened, so this happened immediately afterwards. The last time that I looked at her website, it was still intact the next time after this comment when I looked, it was this, and they have also shown to me that they were responsible for that. Now the problem with this is, Eyes Wide Open is still downloadable, but the problem with this manuscript is that it is a very long document. And if you write such a long document, then it can also contain, then it may also not be always entirely accurate, right? And she also talks about some things which are very difficult to believe. I do think that it's all written in honesty, but again, if you write such a long manuscript, then not everything in it may be factually accurate. And also she talks about some things which are very difficult to believe, especially if you're not very high in trade openness. But on her website, she had everything detailed in a much more compressed manner. And if you type in Google, you can still find her abuse drawings, for example. So my main suspicion with why they did this was to discourage me from taking this route further, which I ended up going, because Fiona Barnett came to serve as an example for me to how one can successfully combat the CIA. And you have to, if you're a reporter or an editor, you have to be aware that this is a case which is very much similar to Fiona Barnett, in that not only is it about mind control, but also is it a black op. And as such, you cannot, unfortunately, you cannot expect me to, even though I understand that you may need decisive and conclusive evidence to report on this subject matter, because you are in risk of discrediting yourself. The problem is that the CIA is not, or any IC is not going to do things in a manner which leaves such evidence so easily. But she came to serve as an example for me for how one can successfully combat the CIA. So that's why, probably also, that's one of the main reasons why they censored this. But the other is that they'd been lately trying to recruit people like crazy, and it is also a thorn in their eye with regards to that, right? Especially because this involves kids, and especially because the CIA currently has such an emphasis on recruiting kids, right? So this is new. I can't stress how much of a red flag this is. It is not something which is only evident there, right? Because if you, for example, their newest recruitment ad, which they have released about half a year ago, It's the same thing. They're selling the idea. They're first of all, it also, like, if you watch this ad, you'll realize that it is very much aimed at young people and teenagers and so on. And same with, the new logo, not the new logo, the new look which they have, the new design. It's also design elements which are very much aimed at young people. Also, they also recruit veterans, but if you look at their Twitter also, it's just all about recruiting kids. It's all about recruiting kids all over and young people all over. And why are they doing that? I'll say that in a second, or let's say my suspicions in a second. But first of all, what should be suspicious to you is that they are putting such heavy emphasis on recruiting spies, right? In this video, just like in this, and when human is basically dead and spies basically don't exist anymore in the 21st century, right? Not for the CIA. Those who are in the know that if you are currently get recruited or take the job as a case officer or a field officer, you're not going to be a spy with 99% probability, because human spies are completely obsolete in this age of signal intelligence. So why are they what CIA, the jobs of CIA and DIA officers and so on in the current time is to occupy positions of influence to then manipulate. And they are trained into becoming brilliant actors and so on. But to be sold the idea of becoming a spy and then to occupy such a job which even goes so far that they brainwash and engage in psychological torture and so on, I think is a complete red flag. And why are they focusing so much even on recruiting kids? It is paradoxically, it's not even paradox, it is perversely the very same reason. It is the very same reason why it is such a red flag in the first place, because kids are most easy to indoctrinate and to manipulate, right? So it is precisely because they do things such as brainwash and torture, it is so valuable for them that is my suspicion, but I think that is true. It is precisely because they do things such as brainwash and torture and everything else which is just as bad, that they need to recruit very young people and kids so that it becomes an acceptable practice, it becomes an acceptable method for them, right? Because the best way to make such practices acceptable for someone is to indoctrinate and manipulate someone into believing that those are acceptable practices from early on. So, and it's also not the only, there's no comments here, right? This is not the only thing they censor. In my research just recently, CIA, not CIA, but I see related videos have been banned left and right. Not so much videos, especially accounts, but also, for example, if you type in, there used to be a video here, and now there isn't anymore. Now it's this one. It is the same clip still, but, and then you may wonder, well, what's the problem? The problem is if you type in Google, you don't find anything anymore. And it also, the title doesn't really help the topic as much as it is counterproductive, because it sounds so much like a conspiracy theory, right? And so if you're a reporter, obviously if you ask the American ICs, they're going to tell you that this is a national security issue. But if you're a reporter, the red flags concerning emerging tyranny and totalitarianisms are everywhere. And to quote William Binney, who is obviously an extremely credible source, right? He is the first prominent NSA whistleblower there's been.
A democracy, that is really scary business.
It's actually a totalitarian process that's been used down through history. I mean, that's what totalitarian dictators, states, that's what they want to do. They want to know everything about the population so they can control it. That was the idea behind this.
If you look closely around the happenings of the current world stage, you will find indices revolving around this case everywhere. So please, if you are interested, please contact me. Democracy dies in darkness. And you may be able to save lives. They've been threatening me with torturing the Petersons for making this video. Obviously, I'm still making this video because I don't believe that the other path will work. I believe that they're only going to walk ourselves to our deaths. I already knew half a year ago, when I have committed myself to this, that they're going to threaten me with absolutely everything, and they have threatened me with absolutely everything. They threatened me with destroying my electronic devices. They threatened me with changing my passwords, with stealing documents, with kicking me from my flat, with severe damage through their DWs. They threatened me with immobilizing me, with blinding me, with mutilating me, with every method of torture that you can think of. And they threatened me with killing and or torturing family members or friends. And so far, none of these things have happened, which I think is very telling for the position that they're in. Except for minor damage daily through their DWs and some very minor life destruction tactics. It also seemed like that they were abusing the Petersons recently, which I'm very sorry for. So I hope that you forgive me, but I have stopped looking at their social media now, because just like with any other communication channel with the CIA, really, because the DOD, because my experience has been that they simply abuse those to deceive me and to manipulate me and to coerce me, and I don't really see any sense in that. If I'm not mistaken, then they have stopped with the abuse already. I also don't think that they're going to pull through with those torture threats. I think it's extremely unlikely, because they only provide further indices and further evidence for my claims, and they also only make themselves extremely unpopular towards their own agents and towards the public. And all of these things are the least things which they want to do. So yeah, please. I am sure that if you talk further with me, you will be convinced of my credibility and that I am not psychotic. I also lastly want to thank anyone who's been helping me or supporting me without my knowledge. So thank you very much, because if you weren't there, then maybe I wouldn't be here anymore. So